I'm not giving the technology presentation.
And Terry's with Project Hospitality in Staten Island. Welcome.
Hey, so I have handouts over here on the end of the table. I have 3 PowerPoints, of which I'm just going to show one. But the handouts are from all 3 PowerPoints. One is entitled Being Your Best During the Worst. The other one is entitled Neighborhood Resources, Be the Neighborhood Resource You Were Meant to Be. There's all about disaster preparedness. And the third one I'm going to do now. Let me just say that our baptism by fire into disaster preparedness came after 9/11. We had an office in the Staten Island Ferry Terminal for homeless outreach, and Red Cross couldn't get into Staten Island, and the evacuation occurred, as you know, across the water. The ferries brought people over who had survived the collapse of the towers. We picked people up from the ferry, we took people to the hospitals, and we ended up opening and running the 2 shelters on Staten Island closest to the ferry, and then a third one for the course of the time that Staten Island was locked down and we were not able to cross into other boroughs. That was followed by the October 15, 2003 ferry boat crash. Also, again, because we had an office in the ferry terminal, we ended up providing a response there. Between 2001 and 2003, all senior staff people in our agency had to become CERT certified. We made everybody become a member of CERT through the Department of Homeland Security, and every 2 years, everybody has to renew that certification, because it's not like riding a bike. You really have to know this stuff and carry your bags with you at all time and know what you're doing. Finally, I believe we're the only supportive housing agency in the city that lost three people in Sandy. We lost 2 drop-in center clients who drowned. They left the drop-in center. People thought they were safer in Manhattan. They went over. One drowned on Broad Street, one drowned on Water Street. And a third person, who was a homeless street person from Staten Island, drowned in Fox Beach, and his body was only found about 12 months later. So that's the experience we bring in. Today, about 5 blocks from our soup kitchen, 5 houses burned down this morning with 34 injuries, 100 people homeless, and most of my staff are actually at that site assisting Red Cross today. So we didn't plan to get involved in this, but here we are. So I want to take this from the consumer, tenant, resident, whatever you call the people that live in our housing perspective. And this is learned from having tried to teach disaster preparedness post 9/11. There's wonderful material that's provided by OEM. If you don't know what that is all about and continue to integrate that into your agency and into the work that you have with your consumers, it is absolutely useless, and people get bored after you do the same presentation over and over again. So this is what we put together. We call this Put Your Cap On and Get Ready. Instead of using the word disaster, we use the word community assistance, because disaster is like, well, we're waiting for a disaster to come. And you know, you check your 400-page manual and ask yourself, are we in a disaster now? Which is exactly what we did in Sandy. I had executive level staff look down and say, does this constitute a disaster, right? And they should go work somewhere else. But really, to be prepared, I just want to say this, it's got to be in your bones. So we call something, this is called READY. You reinforce preparedness by ongoing actions. You educate your tenants and staff on disaster preparedness and resiliency, which means how you make your life and your space more prepared for disaster, not just yourself. You assist the community through service. You develop valuable preparedness and empowerment skills with your tenants, and then you integrate disaster preparedness into the broader community. Based loosely on the CERT model of disaster preparedness, a team model of disaster response from your tenants reinforces and develops these concrete skills, such as search and rescue. We're not asking tenants to go searching and rescuing, but you want to know if somebody went in the bathroom and didn't come out of the building. So I'm not talking about covering bodies in the wilderness. But although I got to say, 24 people drowned on Staten Island, and we were discovering bodies 2 months later because nobody knew where their neighbor was. And our windows were blown out of my house where I live, and I was holding tight to my mother who's disabled and my brother who's disabled, and I had no idea what was happening in the houses across the street from me or next door to me, and that is a stupid way to be. But you learn that. But you can teach skills, in addition to evacuation, basic fire prevention, which tenants need to know every day, 24 hours, how to respond to a fire, basic first aid, CPR, observation, intruder prevention, somebody getting inside your building, just your basic safety. All of this roots disaster preparedness and response into the bones of our tenants, where it needs to be. We have a very cerebral understanding of what it means to be disaster prepared, giving out booklets, flyers, and holding classes. But we need to develop a hands-on competency from the knowledge base, and that's as much about skill building and training response as it is about knowledge of preparation, being prepared. So, when a disaster happens, you have a very high level of emotion, right? You have fear. I mean, I have PTSD from Sandy. I cannot listen to that little beep that goes on the television at 3 o'clock in the morning that says this is a monthly test without actually having a physiological reaction almost 2 years later to that. So you have to know it in your bones because you have to be able to respond to it. You have to get past the fear factor, and the best way to get past that fear factor is to really have it in your bones, to really know it in a hands-on way. So you need to practice preparedness. You need to create response exercises. I joined the local Staten Island CERT. I not only made my staff do it, I'm the only one from the agency that was nuts enough to join this group of people that rehearse every weekend. I don't give up every Saturday, but I give up at least one Saturday a month, and I do things that I may never need to do again, like learn search and rescue. However, it's really important that I feel comfortable enough that I'm going to have that level of preparedness when I have the responsibility of 400 supportive housing tenants, resting on my neck to be sure that we do the right thing. At a time of disaster, whoever was talking about you were just talking about the book, right? You cannot be grabbing that information card and saying, what do I do now, right? We need to help people develop the hands-on competency. I call it from the brain to the bone. So, again, most disaster preparedness deal with what's going on in your household. Secure your house, listen to instructions, grab your go bag, and go. But supportive housing programs are like mini communities, right? We're a mini neighborhood, and we serve differently abled people. So what we're communicating really has to be communicated at different levels so that everybody's on board and everybody knows what they're doing, not just those of us that can read the material. With that in mind, we need to reinforce disaster preparedness. How do you prepare your go bag? I want my staff to have 2 go bags. I want us to be in possession of everybody's go bag, and I want everybody to have a go bag. And not because we're going to be out for a year, but we might be. But so that if they forget their go bag in their room or their apartment, I've got a backup go bag. Along with a backup list of people's medications and a backup list of food allergies and whatever it is you want to put it on your cloud, somewhere that you're able to access the information. How do you secure the person's apartment? How does the person know if their neighbor is ready to go? Do you know where your neighbor is? And so you can develop weekly practicums like the fire safety and CPR, heating safety, right? Apartment safety, drug overdose, teach your tenants how to use Narcan, exposure issues, intruder safety, crime prevention. These are all ways of communicating an emergency response without thinking disaster, because if you think disaster, you're thinking in the future to something that's not going to happen for a long time, probably till after you retire. You need to reinforce disaster preparedness with the creation of an awareness and a culture. This sounds like ridiculous, but if you go on the internet, you can find potty posters about disaster preparedness. What better place to put a poster than in a stall so that people can read, and not just the magazines. Communicate, motivate, and inspire people to be prepared. Put it all over your walls. You have to create the culture of preparedness. Develop a section of your tenant meetings, and this is really important. This should be integral. We have the punch list of what you do at a tenant meeting. This has got to be on every tenant meeting. Again, take the word disaster out and call it community preparedness. Have them ask themselves. Let them create their own list. Ask them, who in this apartment building needs help getting down the stairs? Do you know who needs help? Who needs help having something carried? Etc. Bring in, now this is education, bring in free outside providers. Don't do the education yourself because they're tired of hearing you anyway. And there's a lot of stuff that's open. Look, you can use film, you can use skits, you can use work group scenarios so that people are interacting with each other. Governor Cuomo, not himself, but his trusted staff will go anywhere in the state of New York and do a fabulous free presentation, and you get your own go bag, you just have to stuff your clothes in it. The Red Cross has standard presentations. I already mentioned the OEM through New York City Ready, and World Cares. How many people have heard of World Cares? They have a fabulous presentation that includes knowing your neighbor. That's what really impressed me about them. Assist. Once you've got this going in your tenant meetings, sift out who your leaders are who would be willing to create a community response or assistance team within your supportive housing program. Develop a response team. Have them work with the staff to develop the training and the practices themselves. Building a response-based community team is crucial because you want to keep this ongoing. This should not rest solely on your staff. You need to be able to know that your tenants, when your staff retires and moves on to another job, that this stays stable within your house. Create your mission. The community assistant team helps to keep tenants and residents safe in their housing space, or whatever, right? And help them get through train the trainer exercises so that they can be the one that train new people that move into housing. Then develop the resource of your consumers. A tenant assistant team can become an assistant network across your agency's different housing programs. You can develop programming, events, learning modules that can be tenant-led, tenant-taught, and tenant-learned, so that they are empowered to know what it means to do to respond in an emergency. And the staff needs to develop competency alongside the tenants. There needs to be a simple disaster preparedness plan for tenants as well as your complicated agency plan that your funders look at when you're audited. But the documents need to communicate the same message, procedure, and plans in a language or in pictures that are clear, understandable, and in checklist form. I'm repeating what's already been said. The advantage of developing that practicum, again, is that it's not staff dependent. So what you're doing through this is building tenant empowerment as well as preparedness. Now, integrate this. First, integrate it into your program, integrate it into your agendas, integrate it into your module of what you communicate and what you teach and share with tenants. But extend this support to the outside community. So, your tenant assistant team can do community work outside of your building, on your block, in your neighborhood. This gives a sense of ongoing purpose. It serves the greater community. You can do things like block neighborhood or park cleanup, beautification projects. That will involve your tenants in working with other key community stakeholders, hosting disaster preparedness info tables at community fairs. Really, prior to 9/11, did you ever see a disaster preparedness information table at any resource fair? No. No, okay. So we got a market here nobody's doing. The supportive housing organization or residents should also join the long-term recovery organization in your area. Every borough has one. Long Island's got a couple. Some areas have them upstate, and the shores of New Jersey have them. Then your assistance team can integrate themselves into your local community board, your local area committee, your civic association, your neighborhood association, your block association, or your councilmanic office, and you become part of an integrated community response. Most importantly, disaster preparedness becomes an integrated part of your program design and your training at each supportive housing site. Then you will have built in your bones training that is integral to the daily lives of our tenants and residents. And then we'll be able to save lives, reduce damage, and build the care and concern for one another we need to sustain and protect our neighbors and ourselves. If I had just known this now, prior to Sandy, I would have at least 2 homeless people alive.